Hello, beautiful. I'm your host, Nicole Goff. Welcome to the Ecstatic Life Podcast, the podcast for women who want it all: health, wealth, freedom, authenticity, love, beauty, all of the hidden gems just waiting to be uncovered. This is the podcast for women who are ready to discover their inner creatrix, to discover their inner manifester, and who want to find the ecstatic in every day. Hi, and welcome back to the Ecstatic Life Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Goff, and today I am here with Courtney Johannesen, and she is a mindful parenting coach, emotional regulation expert, and a mom on a mission to help parents break generational cycles and show up with more calm, connection, and intention. Welcome, Courtney. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here and chatting with you.
Yeah. So already, like, from, your just little bio right there, like, we have so much in common. It's like so my mission too. And so I'm really excited to talk to you. I was excited when I found you on Instagram, and I've been following along with what you're putting out there. And yeah, definitely in alignment and connected with that. So I'd like to just kind of start out, like, if you could talk a little bit about your journey. So your journey to nervous system regulation through yoga and mindfulness and breath work, which is the same tools I used for mine. So if you could give us just a little intro into how you got into this world.
Amazing. Yes. Well, I have found somatic practices, the yoga, mindfulness, breath work, to be so healing in my personal life. Many years ago when I started, they really began to help me deal with chronic stress and really heal from a lot of deep emotional wounds that I had, going all the way back to childhood even. And this was kind of a byproduct of me starting to practice yoga. I didn't really get into it looking for something to help me overcome some of my emotional struggles at the time. But the more I started to practice yoga, work on breath work with meditation, I saw the power that these tools and practices were having in my life. I was able to start to rework some of my mental and emotional patterns that had been harmful, really, to myself and causing me to just show up in my relationships pretty poorly, to be honest.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't being the person I wanted to be, the friend, the girlfriend at the time, family member that I wanted to be. And as I became a mom, seeing what these patterns had done in my past, I started to get really worried about, like, am I going to be reverting back to these patterns because that's what I grew up with? And I was really concerned about that. And I started to see as I was transitioning into motherhood that these tools were helping me support myself through this transition, and that level of awareness that the tools gave me about myself and my needs and how I was feeling and all of these things that um when we pay attention to ourselves, we started to just kind of see ourselves differently. And I saw how this was supporting me as a mom as well, where I was not going back to those patterns. So it became a bit of a real conscious living practice.
Mm.
And so from there, I was like, yes, I really need to stay committed to this because I'm so committed to being a different kind of mother. And I saw that the tools were making the difference in my life and helping me break the patterns and break the cycles of the negativity and the harm, not necessarily physical harm, but the mental and emotional harm that I had experienced. And I was thinking, well, more parents need this because so many parents are caught in stress or have experienced patterns from when they were kids that they don't want to replay. And I think, a lot of people just don't know how to do that. So that's where my mission came from and, why I'm so passionate about it now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fortunate that you had those tools going into motherhood. And so like the intentionality of that is so beautiful. For me, I had some pretty severe trauma. I was living with PTSD when I became pregnant with my first daughter, who is 18 now.
Mm.
And yeah, so I was very young. I was 21 and it wasn't an intentional pregnancy. And I, at that moment, realized I had to get my shit together.
Yeah.
I had to work on myself. I had to heal my trauma. And so also, through these somatic practices, through yoga and mindfulness, I started to, I really started on my healing journey along with my mothering journey. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was kind of the battle of kind of learning as I was going. And I so wish that I had had those tools. Luckily, when I started over again, 8 years later, so
Mhm.
the gap between my next four kids, I did have those tools. I had done the practices, I had done the workshopping. I had actually I went back to college and got a degree in psychology. I did, a thesis on mindfulness meditation for trauma. So I had done the internal work, and I had, worked on those patterns, the generational traumas, and going into it, it was such a different mothering experience the way that I showed up. And so, for so many moms out there, that are already in it, like you can change and you can heal. And I'm so happy that you are here providing this and that we're having this conversation so that we can provide that hope for the moms that are really in the thick of it and, not super happy with the way they're showing up.
Yeah. Well, I love that you pointed out that you can change because, and your story is really a testament to that because I think so many people get worried about damage that maybe they've already done or they think they've done. And then they feel like, well, it's just too late. But really, change doesn't have to look drastic. Change can be super small, like finding a small moment to take a few breaths or finding a really simple practice that grounds you, even if it's just, taking a 5-minute walk outside. Um, finding those little moments throughout the day to create resets, I think is really, really helpful because there's always stress, there's always difficulty, and especially as moms, we're constantly having to adapt and change and be flexible to everything that's going on throughout the day, and, then there's life and the world and everything else that goes on top of that. So, we're always getting hit with stressors, but the way that we are managing ourselves has a real impact on our kids. So when we find those little moments to just maybe, shift a thought in a different way or, realize that the spilled milk on the floor is not the end of the world. And there are, other ways, like, we can just grab a cloth and wipe it up quick and move on. And we don't have to go into a huge mental spiral about it. And all of those tiny little changes actually start to add up over time. And so every time we can take those small steps, we're creating that larger path to bigger change.
Yeah, and so you brought up something that I wanted to highlight. So there's the little incidents that come up, and your platform is emotional regulation for parents. I don't think I said that at the beginning. So that is what we were talking about, emotional regulation, and that's internal work that starts in yourself. So these little things that come up, I mean, it's life, but so many of us from, our generation haven't been taught these essential life skills of regulating our own emotions. And most of us grew up with parents that had no idea about any of this. And, to be talked to in a harsh way, to be talked down to not know where you stand on, an emotional level with your caregivers is super common. And so now our generation, I see a big shift in trying to heal that. But it starts with that internal regulation. And so if you're looking outside to like, well, how do I deal with my children? And it's not necessarily about that. It's
Right.
how do you deal with what comes up inside of you? How do you react to your own emotions where you need to start? So I would love it if you would touch on some of those generational patterns and like things that you experienced growing up and how those patterns live in the body.
Yeah, definitely. And what you were just saying too about the way we look to our kids as being maybe the problem, in air quotes, but the source
Yeah.
of our trouble and our stress, but it starts within us. And our body remembers all of the ways that we've had to learn to cope, even with situations going back to when we were kids, especially if those were repeated kind of patterns. So if you always heard words like, you're not good enough, or, um, even if you saw a lot of conflict in your home between your parents, that creates internal stress. And that imprint is showing up, if it's unhealed, it can continue to show up in your life moving forward. So, I think for myself, some of the words that I heard growing up were some of that message of not being good enough. Um, a lot of perfectionism, um, even in how life was modeled, was a big thing for me too. So perfectionism, and along with that comparison, looking at other people and kind of judging yourself against them was also modeled quite a bit. And there was a lot of internal stress that those things created. And I didn't even realize that it was coming from childhood for so many years. Um, but also just things like being controlled in certain ways where my sense of self was just so small. And, I had to really work to identify things like my own needs and likes and dislikes because my sense of self had just been kind of tamped down so deeply. So I think for me, a lot of it was just learning how to pay attention to myself and realize that I do matter, my needs matter, and even identifying what those things were. Um, I would work internally on like just identifying what do I want out of this situation or experience, or kind of looking at how is this relationship or this decision helping me and hurting me, and really just going through a lot of reflection about choices or situations or potential experiences that were coming up in my life. And I think the mind body practices, the somatic practices, gave me some of that mental space to dig into that a little bit deeper. So my yoga practice helped me to release some of the physical side of the stress that was held in my body.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then when we would get into more of those still quiet poses, I would notice like, oh, I don't have this constant mental chatter, this largely negative voice in my head right now. And that little bit of space and peace, and then the clarity I had after was so valuable to just shifting my perspective in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, I totally feel that because once I got into some of the somatic practices, and ecstatic dance has been one that's been really big for me. I started actually feeling those stuck traumas and those stuck emotions moving out of my body. And sometimes something would come up and I would start crying and I wouldn't even know why. But actually freeing those emotions and those traumas that have been there since, yeah, possibly childhood, because I
Yeah.
do believe, that most of us grew up with those same kind of messages. For me, it was slightly different messages. It's the too bigness. You're too much,
Mhm. Right.
But we grow up with these messages, and usually from well-intending caregivers. It's not like necessarily you grew up with abusive parents, but just parents trying to be parents and going through this pattern that they had done to them. Children are to be seen and not heard, and children are, yeah, there's all these conditionings. And so I think we're the first generation in a while to question all of that and to question this need for automatic authority, and for kids to be subservient and for kids to block their emotional realities. And so now in, looking at these tiny humans that we're raising as sovereign beings and, people with wisdom and their own experiences is new. And so we're all of us mamas pretty much now dealing with the consequences of being raised that way. And I know for me, it was so salient the first time I I remember snapping at my eldest daughter and words came out of my mouth that were the exact same words that had been said to me many times as a kid. And I was just like, oh my
Right.
gosh, I'm my mom.
Yes, that's
I
a
think
scary realization sometimes.
yes, yes. And I think that was
Yeah.
my first realization, before anybody was talking about, reparenting, remothering, generational trauma. This wasn't in the zeitgeist back then. This was
Yeah.
early 2000s. It wasn't in the zeitgeist yet. But that was the first experience I had with, oh wow, like that trauma carried through me and I am now passing it down. So, yeah.
Yeah, that can be a huge moment of awareness too, because you see it. And if you feel that tension, like, oh, this does not agree with me, this is not the parent I want to be, that's really telling. And that's a huge pivotal point because then you start to become more aware and conscious of the things you say, the words, the way you're saying them, and even some of the messaging and the way that you are interacting with kids. So, I think sometimes people see that as like a really terrible moment, but it's also the beginning point a lot of times for making further change. And that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Something that I talk about a lot is mom guilt.
Yeah.
So there's so many of us that are experiencing so much guilt, and it's really not helpful, because it gets you stuck in the spiraling pattern. And, having those moments of self-reflection and being able to learn and grow from it is really the key. And, to do that, again, going back to the inner work, working on ourselves, we need those tools and the tools like somatic practices, meditations, there are things out there that can help us to deal with those internal conflicts and external conflicts that we're having in those moments when they come up. So you had said in your intake how emotional regulation has brought you more freedom and joy, especially in your mothering journey. And so I wanted to see if you would touch on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think just understanding and seeing how I'm breaking the cycle of these generational patterns, even that itself brings me so much more joy because
Yeah.
I, going into motherhood, knew I did not want to be that version of what I experienced. And sometimes I see the moments where, oh, I could react in this way, or I can feel the tension rising in my body. And like, I might have even a certain urge for a reaction. But when I pause and take that breath and realize, like, you know, my child is just this innocent little being. And why would I, put that reaction out onto her? She's just exploring or doing whatever, and she's doing her child thing. My parent thing is to be her steady, stable guide. So maybe that means taking a few breaths. Maybe that means checking my thoughts and giving myself a little shift. And really, every time I see that and bring that level of conscious presence to my parenting, just being a parent is so much more joyful. And I think part of that joy is because we're able to be so much more deeply connected. I feel so much more connected to my child when we're in this good place. And good doesn't always mean that, like, things are perfectly rosy. She has her own emotions that she's feeling. And sometimes they're very big feelings that might come out in ways that are surprising to me or, um, maybe a bit unsavory. But when I can connect with her through those moments, we're able to get through them better. And I guess better is just like with more connection and happier. So it's not always like beautiful and perfect, but I think that staying connected through some of those more intense moments makes such a difference. And that comes from me as the parent. You know, children don't have the capacity to necessarily fully express their feelings, especially not at an adult level, like we might look at from a friend or a partner. And so the regulation is on me. The way I approach those intense moments is on me. The way we repair conflict is on me. And so I need to have the clarity and the presence and the intention to do that. And staying connected is like just so huge for me through those moments.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you made a really, really good point that I want to touch on. And that is that it is our job and children can't do it.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things, it seems simple in our world, but I think a lot of people overlook is it is our job to regulate our children. And so they actually, when they're little, they actually are co-regulating with us. So, on a science level, like they actually need us to regulate them. We are that sounding board and we are there for that co-regulation. They cannot do it on their own. And so,
absolutely. And oh, sorry, go
oh
ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we're always co regulating with them. So if we're co regulating with them, but we are at a higher stress state and maybe feeling reactive, that's affecting their state as well. So if they're in some kind of tantrum or outburst and then we snap and we yell at them, that's only going to elevate and escalate things on their end too. So that co-regulation's always happening. And I think sometimes we might forget that, like, oh, co-regulation, it sounds kind of, peaceful and like connected, but that's happening even when we are ourselves in a bit of a difficult state.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing like, coming to your children in that dysregulated state, being
Yeah,
all stressed out, and then seeing how your kids react. And the next
right.
thing you know, they're fighting with each other. And that's a very common, like you're fighting with your husband, for instance, you're stressed out about work, whatever, and your kids pick up on that. And the next thing you know, they're mimicking that behavior and they're all dysregulated.
Right.
So yeah, it does. It goes both ways. And that's the importance of also regulating yourself before going into interactions with your kids, just the daily maintenance of it. So I'm really big on having a maintenance routine. I try to get up earlier than my kids and make sure I get in my meditation and my breath work and some yoga before I even interact with them, because when you're starting out your day in a regulated state, you're so much more able to handle everything that's coming your way because, shit happens. And
Right.
then,
Yeah.
the car breaks down or the dinner gets burned or you have an argument with your partner or these kind of things are going to happen every day. There's going to be some kind of wild card thrown at you usually. And so to have that like baseline that you're starting out with makes it so much easier to deal with things as they come your way. So I think it's really important. I would encourage every mom out there to have some kind of a practice, an intentional practice. And this would be a great time if you want to go into that. So you were a yoga instructor, right?
Yes. Yes. I've taught yoga for many years. And I think that, I mean, I completely agree with you that any kind of practice you can do becomes like your ritual. And that's your go to regulating time and means and method. And that can look like, I mean, really anything that works for you. It could be, an hour long, it could be 10 minutes long, it could be 2 minutes long if that's the time that you have. Um, for me, I often do my practice at night right before I go to bed. And that really helps me kind of turn off my mind from the day. And that gives me that reset. I find that, the stress just kind of melts away from my body. I'm able to sleep better and sleep more soundly. And so I find that to be a good time of day for me, and at least where my family's at right now too. I used to have a great morning routine, and I would love to get back to that. But right now, my time is in the evening. And there's times when occasionally things happen and I don't get to have that time. And I completely notice the difference in myself and
Oh
how I
yeah,
feel.
me too. If I sleep in and I miss that window, it's like my whole day is a little bit off. Definitely.
Yes,
I
yes.
feel the
And
difference.
these practices are our anchor. They're our anchor to ourself. And, of course, there's all the things throughout the day that throw us out of that regulated state. But then it's so much easier to come back when you have that anchor, when you can reconnect and drop back in and, give yourself maybe that mini reset, whatever that works for you. But it's really key to have some kind of practice or ritual. Some people love journaling. Maybe it's a morning journaling session before your family wakes up. Maybe it's, sneaking in you know, 3 minutes of journaling. I mean, I think sometimes it seems like these things need to take a lot of time, but they really, really don't. It's just whatever you can sneak into the tiny moments in your life, really, but having something to anchor you.
Yeah, and I'm always like big on mini breaks. So, if you can get in a formal practice in the morning, an hour before bed, like, when the kids aren't around, awesome. If you can make it to the gym for an hour, awesome. Make it to a yoga class, that's great. But if those things aren't available, and some days they're not, some days all the kids have stomach viruses,
Right.
so, and so these like little mini breaks we can give ourselves, even just one thing that I do if I'm starting to feel slightly overwhelmed, I walk outside and I look at the sun and I stand on the ground barefoot.
Mhm.
So even just that act of grounding. So just spending a
Yes.
few minutes with my feet touching the earth and getting the sun on my face just completely is like a reset. That grounding completely resets my nervous system so that I can come back in with calm and presence and feeling okay in my body. Because, so especially, for those of us that have experienced trauma and, carry that around, a lot of times the reactions that come up can feel triggering, can feel put you back in a fight or flight kind of stance. I don't know, for me, like as I've gone through my motherhood journey, which has been almost 20 years now, I've seen how that has changed. But there were definitely things with my eldest that would trigger me to the point where, like, I would feel ready to jump out of my skin,
Yeah.
where trauma responses would come up, things that would, reactivate that PTSD. And so it was very difficult sometimes to even, function in those moments. And so little things like, grounding, little mini breaks that you can take to do breath work. 3 minutes of breath work can completely shift your entire perspective. I mean, it's amazing. When I found breath work, I was like, oh, like
Yeah.
I feel so much more at home in my body now. But just these little, just little bite-sized pieces that we can take can completely shift our perspective in that moment. And that actually gets me to something I wanted to ask you about. So the connection between nervous system healing and parenting.
Yeah, it's huge actually. And I think something that is not talked about enough because the state of our own nervous system is impacting the state of our kids, our whole house, the way everything is functioning in our own internal home world. And, I self-care practices are great, but I think nervous system care is even better. And they do go hand in hand, but caring for our nervous system takes more inner work, I think. We're paying attention to our internal stress responses. So that might look like a fight, a flight, a freeze, or a fawn kind of response. And there's little things throughout the day that can set that off. You might feel a little surge if you're running late in the morning, Or if somebody asks you just one single question, you might feel a little bit of an emotional surge in one of those type of responses. And so I think, that's where, again, the regulation tools where you can sneak in little moments to come back to balance and get grounded is really key. I think a lot of people think that nervous system regulation is just being calm all the time. And while that does sound amazing and blissful, we do need a little bit of activation to, help us just get up and go kind of thing and do things throughout the day. We need a little bit of energy just to, take care of the things we need to do. But the regulation part is all about being able to come back to a balanced state. So you don't want to be overly activated, but you also don't want to be overly deactivated because that turns us into just being too passive and, doesn't help us really move forward with our lives. So, finding the ways that help you come back to balance, kind of being in your optimal zone where you don't feel overly stressed or overly just kind of dull and passive. And as a parent, that is key to all of the ways we interact with our kids throughout the day. So paying attention to your internal state, noticing the things that are triggering for you or cause that surge of a stress feeling, whatever that looks like for you. And, maybe keeping track of it, writing it down, um, journaling about it, or just noticing like, hey, when I have this conversation with this one particular person, I get this really strong tension in my chest. And, just kind of paying attention to the patterns that are behind your internal reactions. Maybe it's a certain thought or a certain situation you have to go through every so often. And when you start to see the patterns and learn some of the tools, you can start to then apply the tools to those situations. Um, like you mentioned, breath work. And one of the reasons I love it is because it's just so accessible. You can do it anytime, anywhere. You don't need any tools, outside tools, or anything to do it. You could be sitting in your car, you can sneak it in throughout the day, anytime, and it gives you that reset. There's different types of breath work too, so I think it's important to know that not every type of breath work is going to work for any situation, but some, get applied in different ways. But there are a lot of tools out there, and I think it's so important for people to just find something that works for you, but that's not always going to be the same thing all the time too. So paying
Yeah.
attention to what you need and then like learning to adapt and try out different things. Maybe you try one or two things and it doesn't work right now, but that might help in a different situation. So, learning a whole tool set is really ideal. So you have a few go-to things for when you need to and when you need to regulate and come back into that grounded, centered place.
Yeah, yeah. And so Kundalini is a good practice. There are so many videos on YouTube. You can just Kundalini yoga for blank, and it can be
Mhm.
for anything. So speaking of those like specific tools, for anxiousness, for anger, for what, and if you are finding that there's certain patterns that are coming up, like you said, finding the specific tools for that specific problem. Because, definitely what you said about our nervous system responses being normal. So that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, sympathetic nervous system response is absolutely a normal part of every day. And that's designed to keep us alive, to keep us, motivated to find food, or, our primal bodies, our primal brains were designed to take that information and react upon it. But one of the problems that I see in our modern life is we have these these more low level stresses that are happening all the time. And even like social media, just, the pressures from that, but the pressures from our jobs. And, there's so much low level stress that's happening all the time that it can be building up to the point where our sympathetic nervous system is activated all the time. And so any little thing, like you said before, your kid spills a glass of milk and you're already in this sympathetic nervous system response. So that registers in your body as some huge offense. And so it's important that we learn to, when we talk, I know this is like a buzzword right now, so maybe we should like define it, like what it really means to regulate your nervous system. Hello, beautiful. Did you know it really helps this show if you like, subscribe, comment, rate, or share this episode? Did you also know that I have a $5 a month Patreon subscription? If you head over to patreon.com/Nicole Goff Speaks, you will find bonus content where I have an archive of health and wellness advice that you will not get anywhere else. So please support Ecstatic Life to make your life and mine more ecstatic. Thank you. But that is bringing yourself back into the parasympathetic, into the rest and the digest, because we want to be able to have these appropriate reactions. We don't want to stay up here in the sympathetic response. We don't want to stay up here in the fight or flight, but we want to be able to get there if we need to take action. If you see your kid about to fall off of a ledge, you want that sympathetic nervous system response so that you can move into action really quick and grab them and pull them back. But to regulate your nervous system, to get it back into a state of calm is also very important, because you don't want to be in hypervigilance, always looking for, the next terrible thing that's going to happen. And so, yeah, practices like breath work, moving energy through the body. So different embodiment practices, different somatic practices, even like things like shaking it out, jumping around, just little silly things. And the fun thing is like these kind of things can be done with your kids too. So when you feel it coming up, you're like, all right, let's shake our sillies out. I mean, depending on what age kids you have.
Right, exactly. I'm thinking of this too as you're speaking, because when people are finding it hard to find those little moments throughout the day, get your kids involved. Like, do it with them, and they can see how it's like it can be fun and it's playful, and you're helping yourself at the same time. And, I think it's even great to talk to your kids about how you are feeling too, and
Oh, yeah.
showing that you can identify your emotions. And that's another really positive way that we as moms and as parents and guides are teaching our kids how to deal with their emotions, because we're always doing this modeling. So if we model and end up yelling at our kids, that's modeling one thing. But if we tell them, hey, I'm feeling really angry right now, so I want to go stomp around outside. Let's go do that together. And, just showing them, what does it look like to stomp, and, maybe start like marching around and, have a little marching game and like they follow you, or, whatever. But you can make it fun and playful too. And to show them like, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I'm going to do about it. And that's really, really powerful, because especially when kids are younger, they have these big feelings and they don't always know what it is and what it means and how to deal with it. And if we are showing them unhealthy emotional responses, if we're yelling, if we're, lashing out, throwing something, whatever it might be, they're going to see that and see like, well, I have this big feeling, so maybe it means it's okay if I go kick the door because that's what mom did. And, I think most of us don't want that for our kids and our families. So when we are processing our emotions in healthy ways and telling our kids like, oh yeah, I feel some anger about this, or, even if it's sometimes appropriate to mention what the situation is that's underlying your feeling. sometimes it's not, especially if it's a shared situation, like, oh, I'm really sad that our pet goldfish just died. That might help them say, oh, yeah, well, I'm sad too. And they can start to recognize that feeling in themselves. Other times it's not appropriate, or you might just give us real short, simple reason about why you're feeling that way. But I think the more kids see us identify our emotions and then do something about it in a healthy, positive, productive way, the more we're showing them how to handle emotions. And that helps them learn how to regulate as they become older and have relationships themselves.
Yes. Yeah, and that's really important. Um, and also like the way that we are speaking to them about their emotions and about their experiences is another thing when you're speaking made me think we should touch on because part of it too is not blaming your child for your emotional reaction. And so I see this all the time with parenting and just not just with parenting, with the way we communicate with each other. You made me
Yeah.
feel is such a common phrase. And it's so hard. I still find myself saying that, made me feel angry. Oh, no, no, no. I felt angry. And so reframing that, so we're not blaming our emotional reactions, our emotional state on our children. When you drew on the wall, I felt really, really frustrated because
Mhm.
I've told you in the past that we do not draw on walls, only on the paper, and also to give solutions. Can you help me take this rag and help me clean this up? And that's so important. And it's such a radical way to speak to kids or to speak to anybody, really,
Yeah.
to take responsibility for your own feelings. And that doesn't have to necessarily be in response to something a child did, but like you said, if you're having a grown-up situation, even if it's not something that, is age appropriate to share with your child, but just to say, Mommy had a really, really frustrating day. And I'm feeling just really ragged. And I just want you to know it's not your fault,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's just so important to have that open line of communication with our kids and to be able to let them witness also that we're not perfect. We're not, these like people that are up high on a pedestal above you, which I feel like again going back our generation, that we did. It was like some moment that I realized that my parents weren't perfect and didn't know everything. And it was like shocking to me.
Right.
I'm like, wait a second.
Right.
They're not gods, they're just real people. And so I try to bring into my parenting the realness of like, I'm just a human and I'm just figuring things out.
Yeah.
It's my job to care for you, it's my job to guide you, but sometimes I mess up.
Mhm.
And I don't mind saying I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good for kids to see that and understand that because then they have more acceptance in themselves when they mess up or when they have difficult emotions. It's like, well, it's just so much more normalized if they see that in us. And that when they experience it, it's something that is a bit more familiar, even if they haven't had that exact feeling before themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and to help children regulate their own emotions also, it is important to help them name those emotions because when especially the younger the child you're dealing with, like you said, they can be very overwhelmed by these big emotions they're having. They don't have the language to verbalize it. They don't have the cognitive abilities to understand, why they might be feeling that way. And so reflecting for them like, hey, you look like you're feeling some really big emotions. Are you feeling really angry about this? Are you feeling really sad about this? And to reflect back to them. And as kids get older, letting them more into your world as far as what is happening in your world is, age appropriate. Now I have an adult daughter. And so now being able to reflect with her, to really talk to her on a level like I would a friend, like a peer, and to be able to help repair. I did a podcast with her a few weeks ago where we talked about my journey with single motherhood, raising her as a single mother, and we spoke about mistakes that I made, and candidly about those lessons where I wish I had shown up more consistently for her, shown up in a more steady, grounded way for her. And so we're able to have those repair conversations about things that, happened, 15 years ago.
Oh,
And
that's
so that's,
amazing.
yeah, that's been really great. And my philosophy is that I'm trying to raise adults that want to be friends with me, that wants to be, in relationship with me.
Yeah.
And when you raise children through coercion and a lot of the tactics that we were raised with, you you miss out on that bond, you don't want to be, I'm not saying you want to be, permissive and be like your kid's friend, like
Right.
there's a
Right.
line there.
Yeah.
But to raise somebody that feels safe in your presence to come to you if they have an adult problem. And that has been very eye-opening now, having an adult child, to see where she does feel safe to come to me with her problems and not to hide things for fear that she's going to be, shunned or looked down on or punished, or some kind of love withheld. So to see that, the arch, how that's come around, has been really amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. I bet that was a wonderful conversation. I want to go check that out. I,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I think too, like you were talking about being able to name the emotions with your kids. And that's a really powerful practice for us to do as adults too. Because the more we can identify our feelings and the related feelings and the feelings that are underneath that, the more we're building our own emotional intelligence as well. And that helps us in all of our relationships, not just our parenting, but the way we are with friends and partners and everybody that we interact with. We have a better understanding of ourselves, and that really enhances our whole lives.
Yes. Yeah. And that brings up a really good point, because the way that we interact with our partners, with the other parent, and even, when there's separated families, the way that you interact with the co-parent, that's so important, because kids are paying attention in those moments so much. And, that's a really big time for them to take on that, and bring it into their adult relationships as they get older. So, yeah.
Yeah, we are their model, and not just when we're in relationship with them directly, but they're watching everything we do when we talk with other parents, co-parents, friends. So the more we're showing up as that version of ourselves that is being the way we want to be, then we're being that model for them, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, and modeling for our husbands too. So that's been a big thing. My husband was definitely kids are to be seen and not heard. Buck up, boys don't cry. Stuff your emotions down.
Yeah.
Kind of person. And so over the years, as I've learned these tools and I model these tools, I see how his communication with his children, and probably internal communication with himself, has morphed as well. And so, relearning that language, being able to identify your emotions. And I think that's even especially harder for dads. They got even more of that messaging as kids, to stuff it all down, and to
Yeah.
emotions are bad for men, right? Which is so sad. It's so sad. But we have our only boy is the youngest, and so it's been very important for me to not repeat that pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point about modeling for our partners too, because they are still part of this generation that might have experienced a lot of those same messages. And maybe they are just not at a place to do that work themselves, but they're watching us and you, like you mentioned, how we are interacting with the kids. So when we are changing our patterns, we're really changing our whole family, and not just the kids, but our whole family culture. And, that's going to affect our kids for years to come.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole lineage, I think it goes,
Yeah.
I think when we heal our own nervous systems and we heal, it's generational backwards and forwards, emotional, or I'm sorry, generational healing backwards
Yeah.
and forwards. I think it just takes one person to break that cycle, and to really heal those generational patterns.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's not easy being that person, but that's such a powerful impact that you're having on your whole family lineage to be able to change the way you're showing up for your kids and their entire future.
Yeah. I think our generation of mothers has really been called to that work too. I see that a lot now, and I don't think it's just because I'm interacting more with those types of people, but I think there's just something in the zeitgeist now that's really, really calling us to step up and to mother differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so refreshing to see so many mothers showing up to that too and really embracing it because it can feel so lonely at times when you're doing things differently than people in your family have done or maybe the people around you are doing. But that's why it's so valuable to have these kinds of resources and conversations to know that we are all not alone in wanting to be better for our kids. And there are ways to get support and get help out there and to change the patterns that you've experienced so you can be the mom you truly want to be for your kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we're getting close to our hour, and that kind of leads me to I would really love it if you could give some kind of just some a tool or a short practice or something. So the moms out there that are listening, if this is new to them, if they're, new into this world, there's a lot of new concepts coming up. Like, what is something they could take from this conversation and implement today? To help them be more grounded and
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think was really life changing for me is finding this small moment where I could feel in my body that I wanted to react, whether it was to say something without thinking or, say something that I would always say when I was triggered or, whatever it might be, to find that small, small moment. It's such a tiny moment, especially in the beginning, before the reaction, and just pause and take a breath. And it will be so uncomfortable at first because everything in you wants to have that immediate snap reaction. But if you can take that small moment and pause, you get a tiny little reset where you can think, is this aligned with the person or the mom that I want to be right now? And if it's an automatic reaction, the chances are no. So then you can do something different. And it helps to rehearse this in your mind a little bit first. So, maybe I decide you want to pause and then you're going to walk into another room for a moment, assuming everybody in the situation is safe. No harm will come to anybody. Maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to just pause. I'm going to go from the kitchen into the living room and just sit there for a full minute, and then I'll come back and revisit the situation. So if you have that kind of planned in your head, then when that comes up, it's a little bit easier to make it happen. But when you can find that pause and interrupt the automatic pattern, that's where things start to shift and change. So that one small practice I would think would be the pause, really trying to catch that reaction before it happens and do something different, whatever it might be. Um, just change the pattern.
yes. Yeah, I call that a mommy timeout.
Yeah, right.
Instead of giving my kids a timeout, I'm like, mommy's gonna go take a timeout.
Yes, yes, right. Yep. You'll come back when you've thought about what you were going to do, right?
Yes, Yeah, and what's really great is if in those timeouts you can have some kind of a little practice to go to that you've,
Yeah.
again, rehearsed ahead of time. So, like your 3-minute breath work or, something that, and it can also be cathartic. I mean, some people get a lot of release out of like hitting a pillow or
Yeah.
screaming into a pillow. Like it can be a cathartic release, but something to move that energy through your body. And
Yeah.
once it moves through your body, like energy in motion, it changes. And then you can go back to the presence and the calm and having your head screwed on tight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can come with clarity and react in a way that is, or respond in a way that is non-reactive. And yeah, that is so, so powerful.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a huge distinction I make in my work, actually, responding instead of reacting, because
Mm.
the responding is the slower process. It takes more thought, more conscious effort and attention, but that's what's most often more aligned with the way we want to be because we're taking ourselves out of that autopilot mode and breaking those cycles.
Yes, yeah, because a lot of time that autopilot mode, that thing that comes out immediately is that childhood programming. Like I said, when I sounded exactly like my mom, that's a lot of times that childhood programming is what comes up first. Yeah, so
Definitely.
retraining. Awesome. Well, is there anything that I didn't touch on or I didn't ask you that you wanted to share today? Anything else you would like to give my audience?
Yeah, I mean, just that idea of reacting and changing our reactions into responses. That's what I work on deeply in my program. It's called Rewire Your Parenting Reactions. And we transform those reactions. We make it into a much more thoughtful process that you can bring into your family life. And, that of course ripples out into your whole life. So, that's the deeper work that I do, the way that I support moms through this process of emotional regulation. And it is just so powerful.
Yeah. So how can anybody work with you? How can they find you? And what are your offerings currently?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram as Emotional Regulation for Parents. My website is my full name, Courtney Johannesen. And the main way to work with me is through my course. So that would be the
Awesome.
place to check it out.
Awesome. And I'll have all that linked in the show notes. And then anybody can get in touch with you. I definitely recommend following you on Instagram. You put out a lot of great stuff. I very much enjoyed your content.
Thank
So
you so
I'm
much.
glad we were able to connect like this. It's been
Me
a,
too.
a little while in the making, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk to me. It's been a great conversation and so many good tools. Like there's so much gold in this conversation. So I really appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad we could connect and chat, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, you too.